What's up guys, today we'll be going over the builds and loadouts I'll be using for Grandmaster Nightfalls this season. And these builds will obviously work for lower tier ordeals also. They'll work very well in GMs, which means pretty much in the lower tier ones, you'll just be walking right through them. And this video will mostly just be me talking, really no gameplay that will be going along with it. One, because GMs aren't out when I'm making this video. And two, honestly, I just haven't been playing that much Destiny recently at all. But I've done all the GMs every single season, and I know what to expect. And all the ones this season are returning ones, nothing new. So I know what works and what doesn't, and that is what this video will be about. Those two builds I'll be using myself, along with my teammates this season. Depending on the exact GM and what you might need or what your character makeup is, you know, you might change out a few things here and there, but I usually use these two builds as like the basis and kind of just change a little bit depending on what I need. So starting off with the first one, it's pretty much my old reliable build for GMs, the one myself and my teammates have used every single season. But I think this season might be the first time where I might use the second build, which I'll be showing off a little bit later in the video. But the first one is double Izanagi's Burden, then one div. And pretty much the whole point of this build is it makes every single champion in the game the exact same. You just put the div bubble on them, both people with Izanagi shoot them, and it'll take the champion to roughly like 20% health. Then all you have to do is swap over to your primary weapon or even like a machine gun and just finish off the last 20% health. And usually what makes this build work extremely well is if the two people using Izanagi's Burden, their primaries are both anti-barrier weapons, which means this season you can use a scout or AR, because if you're going up against an anti-barrier champion, obviously the Izanagi shots won't quite kill them, and they might put up their shield, and that is why your primary being anti-barrier obviously helps out a lot. So two people use Izanagi's, anti-barrier scout or AR, then they follow up with an LMG or a rocket, and I definitely recommend if you're going LMG to use a corrective measure with Firefly, which we'll be talking about a little bit later with the mods. But this season for the person using div, usually they're also in charge of Unstoppable, and this season there's not really too much to choose from, either sidearm or GL, so I think it's just more realistic to use a heavy GL for Unstoppable, which is kind of not the best, and why I might not use this build this season, and I might go to the second set of loadouts, which I'll be talking about a little bit later, because there's really nothing outside of GLs for Unstoppable. You definitely don't want to be using a sidearm in GMs. So for a div user in this season, probably a heavy GL. Then they have a primary choice. Obviously you want range, you know, scout, pulse, or even something like auto rifle. And like I mentioned, just by default, this loadout pretty much takes all the champions of the game to roughly 20% health just from the Izanagi shots alone. But in previous seasons, there's ways to get a little bit extra damage. Just naming one, for example, you could do high energy fire with countercharge for that one season when countercharge was in the artifact, and obviously that worked out very well, which allowed you to instantly kill all the champions with just the double Izanagi shots. And what you can do this season is the empowering from Empowering Rift with Boots of the Assembler is more than enough to be able to one-shot them. So I think having one player in your team, obviously Warlock on Middle Tree Well, putting down Boots of the Assembler, to then empower themselves, then also send the little orbs to their teammates, which is a 35% buff. Obviously that's more than enough to be able to get the insta kill on every single champion in the game, even while 25 under, with the div and double Izanagi shots. And since they fixed it where the empowering works with Benevolent Dawn, obviously you'll be getting all kinds of empowering rifts, so you can place them around. Pretty much you just stand in it yourself as the div user, which will then send the two empowering orbs to your Izanagi teammates, and they'll be able to insta kill the champions. So this build is really good this season and will pretty much allow you to one-hit every single champion in the game. And just finishing out the build, if you're using Izanagi's Burden or the div, pretty much you just want to use Taking Charge and Protective Light. That way when you become red bar, you'll obviously get that huge damage resistance and stay alive. Then depending on what you're using, if you're using something like the corrective measure with Firefly, or you know, a solar GL if you're the div person, or even a solar rocket if you're using Izanagi's Burden, what I usually use is the 3 War Mine mods, so Global Reach, Wrath of Rasputin, and Rage of Warmine. That way whenever I use my heavy weapon, I can create War Mine cells, which will help out with ad clear. So we already went over what one of the Warlocks should be using in their team, the Boots of Assembler for the empowering. But if you have multiple Warlocks, they pretty much just want to use Phoenix Protocol on Middle Tree Well. That way they can get more wells for ad clear, then also boss fights. Then if you're on Titan, most people use Ursa Furiosa for the pretty much infinite blocking shields, which obviously keeps your team alive. If you're on Hunter, I would recommend one person, usually the Hunter, because it just makes sense to use the Aeon Exotic with the one that creates ammo. That way whenever you finish a champion, it will spawn in heavy for your 2 teammates. Then whenever you finish any major at all, it will spawn in ammo without taking in Mirror Super. Then once again, if you have multiple Hunters, you can use one of the exotics that help out with Invis for bottom tree tether. And that is pretty much all there is to the double Izanagi one div. Pretty much the build I've used for every single season with GM so far. but this season might be the first time I might swap off Izanagi's Burden to someone else, and that is on the Anarchy. And that is because there is multiple artifact mods this season that makes Anarchy pretty much absolutely insane for GMs, and that is obviously first Unstoppable GL, then also Breach and Clear, which will debuff pretty much all the champions for you, which means you don't need one person on your team with Div, and all of you can be doing more damage to the champions outside of just 2 players like you were with Izanagi's Burden. So all 3 players could use Anarchy. Then I'd keep it going further. I'd be using a blinding GL, for example the Ignition Code with Danger Zone, which will pretty much blind everything in every single room for you, which will make it extremely easy to stay alive. Obviously one of the hardest parts about GMs is staying alive. Well, if everything can't even see you or shoot, obviously that's going to keep you alive pretty easily. Then in your energy slot for your primaries, obviously you already have Unstoppable covered with the GLs, so I would be using, you know, Anti-Barrier Scout Rifle or AR, but then you need one player to be using Overload SMG or Hand Cannon, and that player could be using something like the Achilles SMG and create Warmind cells. And the exotics for this build is pretty much the exact same as the first one. You probably want one Warlock using Boots of the Assembler. If you have multiple Warlocks, the other one's using Phoenix Protocol. Then if you're on Hunter, I'd recommend once again one Aeon for just ammo, especially since you're going to be using Anarchy for pretty much every single champion in the game, compared to the first build where all of your champion killing stuff is special ammo, so it's a little bit easier to come by. But if you use Aeons, obviously you can create heavy for your teammates, so I think that is even more important in this build than the first one. Then if you're on Titan, you could use Ursa like we mentioned before. Then for the mods, since all 3 players are pretty much using the exact same stuff, once again you probably want Protective Light just to stay alive, and I'd probably use Blast Radius now instead of the Taking Charge, because you're going to be getting a lot of kills with Anarchy or your Blinding GL. And this season in Artifact it only costs 1 energy, so that will pair very nicely on your class item, because your class item will have Breach and Clear on it, which costs 9, so you can only use something that costs 1 energy, and Blast Radius from Artifact only costs 1. Then the rest just depends on what you're using. If you're using the Overload SMG with Achilles, you could be using the 3 Warmind cells to create the cells, and also have them chain one after another. But if you're not using, you know, an Achilles or Seraph weapon, I just fill out the rest of the 3 slots with something like Supercharge, which will allow me get 4 stacks of Charge of Light. Might even use something like Reactive Pulse, or really pretty much whatever Charge of Light mods you want. Then one final thing I want to talk about is the subclasses. So for the Warlock with Booster Assembler or Phoenix Protocol, obviously you want Middle Tree Solar for Well and Benevolent Dawn. Then for the Titan on Ursa, you pretty much just want any of the Void Trees. I recommend top or middle, I guess. Then on Hunter, you pretty much want to be on Bottom Tree Tether for the Invis part, which will obviously get you out of a lot of sticky situations, especially if you're using Aeon Exotic. You can go Invis and then go finish the champion without really risking your life. So you pretty much, no matter what, want to be on Bottom Tree Tether. But the last thing I want to mention is if you have multiple Warlocks on your team, for example, my team will pretty much be 3 Warlocks, I believe, unless Ember gets his Hunter up to light. And more likely, Alex will be using Boots of Assembler. Ember will be using, you know, either Aeon or Phoenix. And what I'll be doing instead is using Stasis, because I think Stasis is extremely powerful in GMs. And I'd be using my Bleak Watcher build with 4 firepowers, then also wait become Charge of Light. For example, Blast Radius with the second build with the double GLs, and pretty much just spam down the Stasis turrets, which will slow or freeze pretty much every enemy. Then on top of that, with the blinding from your Ignition Code, I mean, it'll be really hard to die in GMs. Pretty much nothing will be able to move or shoot you. And yeah, it'll be super easy. All you have to worry about is the champions, which with the Anarchy build, you just stick them twice, which will debuff them and do obviously a lot of damage. Then you wait for them to put up their shield. If they're anti-barrier, then your anti-barrier players obviously break it. Next you know, they're already dead. So overall, those are pretty much my 2 builds for GMs this season. The first one is more for coordinated groups that want to do it very quickly, the double Izanagi 1 div. I think it's going to be the faster of the 2 methods, but also the more risky, and you need to be more coordinated. While the second one, where everyone has Anarchy, you know, blinding GL, you know, even one person on Stasis, it might not be as fast, but it's going to be super consistent and super easy. And whenever you get up to boss fights, the boss fights themselves should be pretty easy too, because you'll simply stick them twice with Anarchy every once in a while, and, you know, eventually the boss will die, and you'll just focus on staying alive, killing the stuff in the room. It'll be super easy. While with the Izanagi's Burden build, that is one of the big downsides of boss fights. Depending on like how many champions there are, how often you do special finishers, you might find yourself you know, using primary a lot of the time on boss fights, especially the ones with multiple phases, which obviously means the boss lasts forever, more room for something to go wrong. While with the anarchy, I think the boss fights will be extremely easy. Anyways, I think that is pretty much it for the video. Let me know if you want me to do like guides on every single GM this season. I feel like all the ones this season are just returning ones, so most people have already done them and kind of know what to do. But there might be like some small tips and tricks along the way to make it a little bit easier. So I'll kind of see how many people want that, and if that's the thing you guys want, I might do that. But yeah, I think that's gonna be it for the video. Like I said, thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.